Hello, and welcome to this webinar on the topic of transitioning to adult services, brought to you by the SATB2 Gene Foundation. I'm joined today by Stephanie Watkins. She's the mom to 24-year-old Noah, an adult affected by SATB2 associated syndrome. Stephanie has walked through this transition herself with her own son, but she also works professionally helping other families navigate these transitions. She has a wealth of knowledge on the topic, and I'm so excited to share her knowledge with you.
Hi, we're going to talk tonight about transitioning to adult services. I am Stephanie, and I have a son with special needs. This is Noah. Noah has SATB2. He was diagnosed when he was 19 years old. Prior to that, we were told that he had what's called a mitochondrial disease. We believe he actually still probably has both diagnoses. Not sure exactly if SATB2 is primary and mitochondrial disease is secondary. We don't know. So just wanted you to know a little bit about how I'm connected to the SATB2 group. Noah is the oldest of 4 of our children, so just wanted to share a little bit about ourselves so you kind of understand where I'm coming from and a little bit about our story. So here is Noah. He is the oldest. He is 24 now. This is my daughter Hannah. She's 15 months behind him, so she's about to turn 23. Samuel and his wife Ellie, they're both about to turn 21. Actually, Ellie's already 21. She's older. And then my youngest, Adam, he's a senior in high school. So it gives you a little bit about our family. Samuel is Army ROTC and plans on being a career military man and hopes to travel the world. My daughter, Hannah, is living about 2 hours away from where Noah is and just started her career as a nurse in the midwife field. And Adam is yet to decide his future. So just to kind of give you a little background as you're thinking about adult services, as I'm thinking about it, these folks play a huge role in our planning process and how we're preparing for Noah's future. So I feel that that's an important key part. So let me move this over because I don't know if that blocks the view. So that was Noah when he was a baby. I know it just seems to me like it was yesterday. I wanted to start this presentation talking a little bit about you younger parents. Stop stressing. You have time. I think a big mistake that can be made is stressing too much about planning for the future. So I really wanted to emphasize tonight to live in the now, plan for tomorrow, but live in the now. Enjoy your family, enjoy your child with special needs. They're beautiful individuals with a lot to offer and a lot to teach us. So don't miss out on those lessons. It was important for our family to find other families that were similar that had special needs children. I think it was good for our kids to play with other siblings, to realize that they weren't the only ones with those struggles. We made a really important effort to carve out special time, to have one-on-one time with each child, and especially one-on-one time my spouse and I. That was really important for us. Talk to other children, to your other children about your child with special needs. Just have an open communication with them about the challenges that they face, because they're going to face different challenges than a lot of their peers. And don't let your life and your family's life revolve around your child with special needs 100%. They're one member, one person in your family unit. So those are just some pointers that, after experiencing this for 24 years, those are lessons that my husband and I have learned. Some mistakes that I made in planning for the future. The biggest mistake that I made was I got stuck. I had this idea in my head that my son, Noah, would live in our home. My parents lived next door. The plan was we would eventually live in my parents' house. Noah would live in this house. We would turn it into a group home. I had this grand plan. And we're in the country and Noah doesn't like it here. And my whole plan kind of crumbled. I'll talk a little bit about that, but as Noah got older, we had more intense behavior problems, and Noah really became a danger to have in our house. Nobody could be left alone with him. We had no choice. We were kind of in a situation where we were in crisis, and he had to go into a group home. And I was not emotionally and mentally prepared for that. So huge word of encouragement and advice to not get stuck on one plan, but maybe be open to lots of ideas. There isn't one way of doing this. There's lots of families in our SATB2 group and that have adult children. And if you talk to all of us, we all have different stories to tell. Some have their adult children at home with them. Some have them in group homes. Some might have them living with a relative. So there's lots of solutions. So don't think that there's only one way of doing this. I didn't really account for Noah growing and changing, because in many ways he's still just a big child, but he hit puberty and he changed and he became a young man in many ways, and he wanted, we didn't really know this until we did it, until he moved out of the house and started living with other young men, but he loves it. He loves it, and that's where he wants to be. When he spends too much time with us, he's begging to go back to his group home. So I didn't really think that would ever happen. So I guess I doubted that he would become a young man mentally. Another big mistake I made was I let the anger and frustration of kind of my past in this experience, in this walk, stressful IEP meetings, schools that were just horrible to him, bad teachers. I really let that, I kind of build up a hostility, I think, and I would go into meetings really feeling angry and really on the defensive. So when it came to planning his adult services and meeting with groups in that realm, I found that I really had this buildup of hostility. And I see it, I work in the profession now, and I see it with folks that I work with. When we're in meetings, I have to remind them, remember, this isn't, the school or this is give them a chance. You have to give new organizations a chance. Another mistake I made when I was faced with a big decision, it was the end all be all, like I had to make the right choice. And rarely is it the case that whatever you're deciding is permanent. When you get into adult services, if you decide, one of the things we'll talk about soon is there's traditional services, group homes and day programs, and there's a program in most states called self-directed services. And in most states, you can go back and forth between one and the other. If you pick a day program and you don't like it, there's other day programs. So it's not like you're stuck. You can't just make the decision once and you have to stick with it for life. So don't put so much stress on yourself that you have to make that decision and it has to be the perfect decision. And then I think the other thing that was just kind of an underlying all the time in my life was I was afraid of failing. I was afraid of failing Noah. I was afraid of failing my other children. I just felt like I always had to do it perfect. And it made me a not very happy person all the time. I think I was just living under this stress that I had to, that I was going to fail my children, that I was going to mess them up. I think all parents feel that way. That's a parental role. But those of us with special needs kids feel it even more because we just have so much more put on us, I think, than most parents. Okay, so those are my words of wisdom. So moving on, real quick, where Noah is now. So Noah is still in the same group home that he moved into. He was actually right before his 19th birthday. He moved in about a week before his birthday. It was the most emotional experience of my life. I will admit it was a very, very hard time. Had I known now what I knew, had I known, I would have, it wouldn't have been as bad. I just made it so much worse than it needed to be. I just felt like Noah was going to be scared and lonely and not understand. And he made the transition much better than I did. But he lives with 3 other young men. So you can kind of see in this picture, most of these staff have moved on, although this girl works in another home down the street. This girl was in college and now she's moved, is in her career, but she takes him out to lunch and she still sees him. And this young lady moved to Texas, but she FaceTimes with him on a weekly basis. So all these important people in his life, you know, they change, and that's hard on him. But as you can see, they love him and he loves them. So Noah receives this service through the Maryland Developmental Disability Administration through a waiver. It's called the Community Pathways Waiver, and it is funded through Medicaid funding. He also receives supplemental security income. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a bit. We have him over for overnight visits, and we see him several times each week. He goes to church with us every Sunday, especially over this summer. He spends a lot of weekends with us. And he almost always asks to go back to his house. He will show us pictures. So moving on to, for those of you with younger children, I know you think, okay, my child might be 2 years old. They're not going to be an adult, you know, for 16 years. There are things that you can do now that you can start to prepare. These are just basic baby steps of kind of where to start. The very first thing I would recommend is this link here will take you to the National Association of Developmental Disability Services. And you can just pick your state and find your state agency. They have a different name in every state, and every state has a different process. There is nothing unified about how they do things. In Maryland, you can, as soon as you have any inkling that your child has a developmental intellectual disability, you can contact the state of Maryland. You can do the application process. Back when I used to do the assessments for the state, I would get 6-month-olds. Oftentimes they can't make a decision at that early age unless it's a very clear diagnosis. But even so, you can make the connection, you can find out what the process is. And oftentimes you can do an application, and most states have a waiting list. Some states have services for children. Those services are usually needs-based. So for families that maybe meet the financial requirements, might get services at an earlier age. It's a great thing to go ahead and just get on their list, because if anything were to happen, or if there were a crisis, you know, God forbid, there was a death in the family, or, you know, a parent were to pass or something. If there's a crisis, that's usually going to help you get into services sooner and faster. So if you're already registered and on the list, and you have, oftentimes you'll have a contact person that will help you to kind of make that next step, and it'll be a little easier. So don't wait on that. Go ahead and do that as soon as you can. Second step is to make sure, really, really important, that you have a will in place. One of the things I'm going to talk about, have later, but if you don't have a will in place and something happens, it's just a lot can, depending on the age of your child, your finances can, you know, your funds will go to split between your children. And that can be kind of devastating for a child with special needs. To inherit money like that can really alter their future course. So we'll look at that in a minute. But really, really important to get a will in place. And it can be a very basic will. You don't have to hire a high-dollar lawyer. It can be a very basic will. Some people find them online, but you want to have that in place. Consider opening an ABLE account or a special needs trust. Those are things that you can do now. An ABLE account, it's a great resource. You need to do some research and find out exactly what it means for your situation. For once you're in adulthood, an ABLE account, if the child were to pass, if your adult child has an ABLE account and were to pass, and they're receiving Medicaid funding, most ABLE accounts are not protected from what's called Medicaid payback. So if your child is receiving state services, that's almost always funded by Medicaid, then they can go back and say your child leaves $50,000 in an ABLE account. That money will go to pay for those prior services that were received through Medicaid. So your child has money and you want to be able to pass that on to other siblings, then you would want to set that up in a different type of account, into a trust or something. And those are all things, we're not going to get into a lot of detail about that tonight, but those are things that you might want to talk to, like a special needs trusted or a financial planning advisor that would help you with that. Okay. So lack of planning really does lead to undesirable outcomes. So according to most state laws, if you die without a will, your children will directly inherit your money and other assets. If your child with a disability receives SSI and Medicaid, they could lose their services because they would lose those benefits, because those are needs-based benefits. Often what happens is, I've had a situation where I worked with a young man, and he did receive an inheritance like that. He was able to stay in his group home, but he actually had to pay out of pocket. And he stayed there and lived there, and he was not supported at all by the state. He basically had to, he had to pay out of pocket for those services. It took him about 8 years, and then he had his pretty sizable inheritance. But I'm sure that his father would have preferred that money not go to the state. He would have preferred it maybe pay for vacations and fun things. He was an only child. But instead, it just paid for his services. And then 8 years later, he went back on Medicaid. So that's not the ideal situation for anyone. In some states, you would actually lose your qualification and then would not be eligible to live in that group home. So it can really put somebody at risk of losing those services. So your child will lose his benefits and have to use the inheritance. That's what I just said. Few inheritances are really large enough to cover those costs for too long. If your child's services are funded by the Developmental Disability Administration, such as day program employment, that inheritance can be claimed. So they can claim for past years. And those services are very expensive. Most families I work with, their budgets are typically between, I have some that are under 100,000, but most people I work with, their services run between $100,000 and $180,000 a year. So it's expensive. Adult services are expensive, and you don't want to have to try to pay for it out of pocket. And then always try to be thinking about, this is something that you should do at every phase of your child's life, whether they're 2 years old, 10 years old, 15, 30. Always be thinking about, if something happens to me, my husband, my wife, the siblings, if we are not here to care for them, then what is the plan? What is that next plan? As they grow and mature, and every time you kind of are in a school situation and you're discussing future plans, and every system has a different, methodology of how they do that. And, they have these life chart course plan, where you sit down and you map it out and you talk about what your dreams are for your child's future. Always as part of that should be, if I am not here to care for them, then who's going to care for them? And not necessarily so much as in a will, although that's important. And as part of that, the will should change, right? It should be an evolving document that moves with your child. But you always need to be considering that piece of it. I can't tell you how many families I have worked with, and the parents will be in their 60s, 70s. I've had parents in their 80s. And when I ask them, what are your plans? The child still lives at home with them. Maybe the child is now 55, 60 years old. The parents are 80. And I ask them, what are your plans for your child when you pass? And they say, we don't want to talk about it. It has happened to me in my career more often than not. When I bring up that topic, they don't want to talk about it. Just make that part of your routine, that who is going to care for them, because that's a gift you can give your child, to kind of have that planned and have that prepared. So always keep that. That's a huge, huge important piece of this. All right, so getting into some basics, I'm just going to skim over a few things. And we had talked about if there are a lot of questions later, you guys can maybe, send the SATB2 group your questions, and we can maybe dig into some topics later if there's a lot of questions on certain things. I just wanted to kind of briefly go over a little bit about guardianship and alternatives. This has been a really hot topic over the past 15, 20 years. There's organizations, I know the ARC in Maryland, I think the ARC nationally has been very anti-guardianship. A lot of large advocacy groups have been very weary of parents gaining guardianship. And there's good reason for that. Guardianship actually strips the individual of their rights and of their independence. And what it does is it makes them a ward of the state. You are technically going into the court and saying they cannot care for themselves. They can't make decisions. They are incapable of presenting or representing themselves. So someone else has to do it for them. So then the court chooses, so my husband and I have guardianship. It was a tough decision, but we felt it was the best decision. We really analyzed it. We ended up doing it ourselves. We didn't hire a lawyer. And so, we basically went through the whole application process. Then we have to go in front of the judge. They actually assign a lawyer to the individual. And that person basically assesses whether or not they really are capable. In our case, it was decided, our son's nonverbal, he can't read or write, he cannot represent himself at all. We did it because we felt like there were a couple instances in his situation where he was asked to sign a document and someone literally took their hand over his and had him sign a document. And it just was kind of a wake-up call for us that we couldn't always trust the people who were always by his side. So we opted to do this, but then essentially what happens is the court says, okay, he can't be his own guardian, so we're going to assign you as guardian. The court at some point could decide you're not equipped to be his guardian and they can choose somebody else. So really he kind of belongs to the court system. He doesn't, you know what I mean? So it does kind of make him that ward of the court. And it truly does strip him of his decisions and his rights. In my line of work, I've often seen individuals that are really capable of expressing their decision, expressing what they want, and a parent has guardianship. In that case, I think power of attorney is probably a better choice. So you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons. Power of attorney doesn't strip them of their rights. Partial guardianship, so what I mean by, so there's full guardianship is guardianship of the person and property. So person is, doctor's appointments, the medical, kind of those basic decisions, and then property is more of the financial component. We did both. I honestly wish we hadn't done property because Noah doesn't have any property, but every year I am required to send in all kinds of financial records and do a whole fiduciary report that I have to send to the court. So it's just more time consuming, and I didn't really need to do it, but we have it in place, so we do it now. Partial guardianship is doing one or the other. So I would say unless your individual really has a lot of financial, say they have property, or say they have, say they have, you wouldn't even need to do it if they have. I have a close friend, her daughter has a huge special needs trust, and they didn't even do guardian of property because the trust doesn't belong to their daughter. It belongs to, it's its own entity. I'd be really hesitant to do property, so give that a lot of thought. Power of attorney, I would recommend that for all of us, that we have someone that has power of attorney, like in case of a situation where we're hospitalized and maybe we're incoherent, that somebody has power of attorney for us, or can maybe, manage our finances if we were to be hospitalized. It's a good thing for all of us to have. Representative payee, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Social Security system, once your child were to receive SSI, Supplemental Security Income, you can become what's called the representative payee, which is essentially like a shared bank account. The funds from SSI will get sent to that bank account every month. And then you have the power to kind of manage that money on their behalf if they're not able to. And it doesn't have to be SSI funds. You can get a representative payee account regardless. But for most of our individuals, by the time they're 18, they're going to get SSI funding. Surrogate decision maker informed consent is more of like a one-time procedure kind of thing. Surrogate decision maker, each state has a different process how you go about this. In the state of Maryland, it's been changing and evolving. I haven't kept up with it. But when we did it, for years, what we did from probably the age of 18 to, we just got guardianship at 22. So for those 4 years, we had our doctors give us a surrogate decision form, basically saying we were the surrogate decision maker for medical issues. And anytime we had maybe to go to a doctor that wasn't familiar with us, or when he was hospitalized, they respected that. It really wasn't a legal document, but it basically was 2 doctors saying that our child was not able to make decisions. And as his medical professionals, they agreed that we were the best people to make the decision for him. And then I would recommend an advance directive for all of us. So those are just some documents that you can start looking into. Okay, so supplemental security income and supplemental disability insurance for adult disabled children. The number one thing, the first thing that you are going to start to hear about as your child becomes a teenager is SSI. Oftentimes people think this is Social Security, right? But it's really not. It's run through the Social Security Administration, but it really is not Social Security. What this is, it's a needs-based program. It's not from Social Security taxes. It's just general tax revenues that go into this program. It's a program designed to help aged, blind, and disabled people who have little or no income. So you might say, well, my child, I'm going to take care of them. They're going to have lots of income. You don't want your child to have income. So everything you're doing now from the time they're young, if you're starting for your other children, you're starting a college savings program, or you have grandparents that are giving you money and you're putting it into a savings account, you don't want your child with a disability to have assets. You don't want them to have more than $2,000. That is right now the limit for them to receive services. So that's where an ABLE account or a trust or something else, if you're in a situation where you're blessed to have that kind of funding and resources for your child, it would be wise to go sit down with a financial advisor that is familiar with special needs and get advice on how to manage that. It is absolutely the number one most important thing you can do for your child, is to make sure they don't have anything in their name. And I know that seems counter to what, as parents, what we're trying to do for our other children. But you want them to be eligible for services. Their best chance of having a fulfilled adult life is to be able to have access to the services that our state and government can provide. Doesn't mean you can't do things in addition, but a lot of states have wonderful services. And I just saw a typo, it's really bugging me, sorry. And so the other thing it does is it provides cash to meet your basic needs. So right now the cap, I want to say it's 783 is the max. I have to look at it, but it's right around the 780 something. It just went up, I think, and I'm not exactly sure that the top max right now. So typically what will happen is when your child turns 18, they will be eligible for supplemental security income. They look at their income, not your income, once they're 18. You usually apply the first month after they've turned 18. If you tend to apply too early, they tend to kick you out and make you reapply because it has to be a full month after their 18th birthday. So you want to do that. I would mark your calendar as soon as they're, 17 and 6 months to start investigating, like the process for doing that. And kind of get the ball rolling, but don't actually put their application in until right after their 18th birthday. So real quick, the difference between SSI and SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, is actual Social Security. It can be for children under 18 or over 18. If a parent can't work because they have a disability and the parent is receiving Social Security disability insurance, the child might be eligible for the child benefit. And that's regardless of if there's a disability or not. What happens once they're over 18 is then that child is then able to get benefits from their adult parents' Social Security if they have a disability. If it's a documented disability that occurs before the age of 22, they can be eligible for that. Parents must be receiving retirement or disability benefits, and that if they're still alive, the child would get 50% of the parent's check amount. If the parent has passed away, they can get 75%. SSDI is always the payer of the first payer, and SSI is always the payer of last resort because it's needs-based and general tax revenue. So what you, right now, what my husband's 5 years from retiring. So Noah receives supplemental security income. When my husband retires, Noah will be eligible for 50% of what my husband's check is. That's going to cause a few issues for him. It's going to put him, he has that $2,000 cap of what he's allowed to have. Out of that, we pay a little bit of rent. Each state will decide what your contribution of care is. So out of Noah's check, we pay a small amount, like $350, I think, for his rent. And then, we use the rest basically to pay for activities and things for him. But that's all he really pays right now. His contribution of care will probably be reassessed. It will go up a little bit, but he's still going to be really close to that 2,000 mark every month. I'm guessing. And it's not going to take long after a few months for him to have over the $2,000. So we have yet to set up an ABLE account. We haven't found the benefit for him yet, but at that point, we're thinking we might have to set up the ABLE account. And what that allows you to do, an ABLE account allows an individual to put up to $15,000, I believe is the max right now. They can put $15,000 a year into that account, and it doesn't count against your benefits. So you can have, I think it was the latest I looked was about $120,000 in an ABLE account and still receive supplemental security income and Medicaid. So that's a really important thing to figure out, how am I going to shelter that money and keep that money for them to use and not lose their benefits. So that's kind of where I wanted to explain a little bit about the SSDI, and for those of you maybe that are close to retirement age and how that plays a role. So then, along with SSI, typically when you apply for supplemental security income, it's going to qualify your child for Medicaid. They kind of go hand in hand. Most states, if you apply for SSI, you automatically are eligible, and oftentimes you'll get a Medicaid card after you do the SSI application in some states. So each state is different. You kind of have to talk to your state and talk to your Social Security office. I think I put a link somewhere in here, I think, for Medicaid. Medicaid and Medicare, the difference is Medicaid is low income, needs-based. Your resources have to be below $2,000. And it pays for state waiver programs that fund services for individuals with IDD, intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. So you want to make sure your child qualifies. If you don't care about the supplemental security income, they don't need the monthly check, that you want your child to qualify for Medicaid. That is what is going to get them the state services that are going to help them with their adult life. Medicare is our basic health insurance. So it's what most of us are going to be on when we're 65 and over. But it also is available for somebody that's receiving SSDI. So in 5 years' time, when my husband retires, my son will start receiving an SSDI check. Because he's already receiving Medicaid and SSI, because he's already been determined to have a developmental disability, he will start receiving Medicare immediately. Typically, my husband won't receive Medicare for almost 2 years after he starts receiving his SSDI check. There's a waiting period, but for adult disabled children, there is no waiting period. Medicare will then become his primary insurance, and Medicaid will be his secondary. He won't lose his Medicaid. So he will be dual eligible for both of those insurances, and won't lose his services in his group home and day program, those types of things. And this is a lot to take in, and I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of an overview about these are all the types of services that you're going to have to learn about to prepare you for the adult life. So transition years, you guys are going to hear, if you have a child in middle school, you might even be hearing about transition, and it's a big term. It's a pretty new term, I think. Some things you can do kind of, I would say, when your child is middle school age into early high school, if you or your spouse work for a large employer, check with the employer. Oftentimes, large school systems, states, large businesses often have benefits for special needs children. Some employers have an option to extend that health insurance for life. As long as you or your spouse are alive, that child with a disability can often be able to get that insurance. We have that option. We had to, by the time I want to say he was 18. It could have been 21. We had documentation we had to fill out. We sent IEPs, we sent medical records to prove that he had a developmental disability, and he is now eligible. We will have to pay for it. So right now we pay for the family plan because we still have children under 26. At some point, he will be the only child left on our plan, and then we have to kind of decide if he already has Medicare and Medicaid, do we need him to have the private health insurance? So we're kind of thinking maybe we won't at that point, but we have time. We don't have to decide that right now. It'll just be a matter of whether or not we want to pay, and we have to kind of see what our monthly premiums are and those kinds of things. But go ahead and get them signed up. You can always make the decision later. So ask your employers. If you're looking for a career change and your child, is heading into those transition years, you might want to look at that as a potential benefit that might weigh, what job you take. At age 18 or slightly prior, start researching Social Security, and then apply for supplemental security income 1 month after their 18th birthday. Like I said, in some states, you don't have to apply for medical assistance. In Maryland, it was just when we applied for SSI, he automatically qualified for Medicaid, and we didn't have to do anything separate. I highly recommend that you go to your local motor vehicle administration and get them a state ID. Our son thought it was really cool to have a little wallet and have his ID, like his brothers and sisters had their license. But it's also oftentimes needed for them to have a photo ID if you want to travel, just all kinds of things. It comes in handy. You can actually do that earlier than 18, so you could do that, at a younger age if you want. I think in Maryland we could do it at 15 or 16. So then every state has what's called vocational rehabilitation services. This site, askearn.org, has a list of all the different state agencies and what they're called. Every state has programs. In Maryland, they start in the high school years and they run summer programs, but it's needs-based, disability needs-based. Your child has to show that they have a disability. And then they offer programs like job training programs. They will provide services. Say, for example, if you need, I had a man I was working with, and he wanted to be able to drive himself to work. And so they helped him. He had a family member donate a vehicle, but it needed adaptations. He's in a wheelchair and he was able to get in and out of the car, but he needed to operate everything with his hands. So the state actually, this program, it's in Maryland, it's called DOORS, Department of Rehabilitation Services, sorry. They actually pay for him to get all the adaptations that he needed to have all hand controls in his car so he could drive himself to work. So they will all provide job coaches, just all kinds of wonderful programs. They have, in Maryland, we have a program in the summertime where young adults can spend like 2 weeks in different job settings and kind of get a taste for different jobs. So it's a wonderful program. You don't have to be, I wouldn't say you have to be like bound for like high level paid employment to do that. There's folks that need a lot of assistance that still get supports through our state program. I'd highly recommend obtaining, if you live in, depending on where you live, if you're not out in the country, to obtain a transit pass. Most states offer some kind of free door-to-door service. And oftentimes, if your child is receiving services and has like a personal aide, the aide can often ride with them. But if your child is in a wheelchair, it's great to have, you know, like a van that's wheelchair accessible, pick them up right at their door and drop them right where they want to go. It's usually a door-to-door service as opposed to a public bus system that you have to go down to the bus stop. Start looking, I would say late middle school, early high school, start looking, go online, contact other families in your area, ask your school system, try to get connected through social media, but try to find out about transition fairs. Usually counties will have like kind of county-wide transition fairs, and you can go in and you can walk around. You know, it reminds me back like the job fairs in college, but you can see all the different services available, and from recreational activities to employment agencies, just all kinds of services available for your young adult, for adult services. And then also check with your school system. Most school systems nowadays have even a transition team. So as your child starts through the high school process, there's going to usually be some talk about connecting you with these community resources and the adult service programs. So make sure you're, you know, if you're in a county that doesn't have a great program at that, hopefully all of them by the time you get there, they will. But ask who that coordinator is. If you have questions, there's usually somebody that can start to answer those questions for you. And oftentimes that will come up in an IEP meeting. Adult services, this is really, really, really important to understand. As you're going through the school system, you have what's called the FAPE, right? Free, appropriate, public education. All of our kids are, you know, and I wouldn't say this last year, we felt that our kids are actually receiving that with COVID, but our kids have a right, right? They have an entitlement to this free and appropriate education. Once they turn 21, and for those of you that don't know this, if your child is diploma bound, they still can stay in the school system until they are 21. If they have special needs and you can prove that they cannot meet their graduation requirements, they can stay in the school system until 21. I highly recommend that you find someone to help you, you find an advocate, you figure out a method. If your child is diploma bound, and I know our group is, we have a wide variety, I think, of youngsters with abilities, and we've seen, you know, some that have more needs than others. But if your child is diploma bound, don't let them try to get your child out of the school system at 18. If that's what's best for your child, then obviously do it. But if it isn't, and you think you can, maybe they didn't get enough credits this year and they'd have to stay another year to get some extra credits or whatever it is, adult services rarely ever start prior to the age of 21. So there will be a gap. If they graduate before 21, there's going to be a big gap if they really need those services. But once they're 21, it's eligibility based. It's you have to show that they need that service. There could be long waiting lists depending on your state. So there is no entitlement at that point once they're 21 for adult services. And that's a really hard thing to kind of get your head around when you've spent the last 21 years kind of learning your rights and learning your child's rights. So that's another reason to be really prepared and really kind of, you know, you still have rights. So it's important to know them. It's important to know what's available in your state. So finally, I think this is my last page. Adult services, just want to do a brief kind of what it can look like. And really, adult services, just honestly, I think can be what you could dream it and you can make it happen. Like, I really think that. here in the state of Maryland, and in most states, there's two options. You have your traditional provider-based services. I know here in our county, we have the ARC, we have a program called Community Living. You know, we have these agencies. The agencies provide things like a day habilitation program, supported employment. We have what's called community learning or development services, personal supports. We have residential services, group homes. Those are the types of things kind of provided by those traditional agencies. And then we have what's called self-directed services. And essentially what that is somebody that might be getting traditional services, say they live at home with their parents and they go to a day program. And the family decides, this is not working for us. Like the child is bored, you know, they're not challenged, they don't have enough diversity in their day, you know, it's not working, it's just not meeting their needs. They can take that funding that was there for that program. And honestly, I would say in the state, if you're doing like a 30-hour a week residential or a day hab program, maybe $50,000, $60,000, and you could switch over to self-directed services. And then what it might look like is maybe you would get 10 hours of personal supports in the morning to help you get ready for your day. And then you would get community development, community learning services where you'd be out in the community. You maybe would volunteer every morning at the YMCA or at a farm, or you can really make it what you want to make it. I have some young adults that I work with that are starting their own businesses. I have a young man that has bees and he goes to a farmer's market and he sells his honey. I really can be. I know another young man that canes furniture. So self-directed services, that's actually the field that I'm working in, and I'm pretty passionate about that because I just have seen what it can do for people. But my own son is not in self-directed services because traditional services meet his needs better. So you really kind of have to, look at your loved one, get their input as much as you possibly can. Listen to them. My son, he points to pictures all the time of his previous day programs. And so I'm able to kind of understand what he likes and what he wants, by letting him communicate to me in his way. And for him, that's pointing to pictures, videos. We have videos of events at his day program. And now with COVID that he's not able to do that, I've learned that he really misses it. And that is the right choice for him. He loves having a place to go. But then he has one-on-one services within that day program. So we're able to kind of almost self-direct what he does there because he has a one-on-one staff person with him. So we set up, we put the effort into kind of going around his community and looking for volunteer opportunities. So he goes in, kind of has home base at his day program, and then he goes out and he volunteers 2 or 3 different places throughout his week. This is before COVID. He would go out and volunteer. Then he'd go back to the day program, sometimes for lunch, or he'd meet up with other folks from the day program out to eat somewhere. We had him doing like a walking club, and so we were really able to create a very individualized day for him, even though he was within a day hab provider, agency-based program. So then also look into community colleges and local colleges. Oftentimes they have most of them now have a disability student services. A lot of community colleges have started like more adaptive classes for folks with greater needs. We have lots of programs in our area. We have art classes and exercise classes at our local community college. We have cooking classes. We have social clubs, just all through our local community college. So that's a great resource. And even now, if you have young children, just start, putting your feelers out. Just start to learn, tap into those resources, and start to talk to families that utilize them. Always recommend trying to make friends with families of older kids so that you can be learning from them. Again, other community programs we have in our area, we have a couple different community resource programs that offer all kinds of classes. And they encourage, we have, I have a friend that actually runs a program. And I have a young lady that wanted to start a walking club. She wanted to meet at the park and, you know, exercise and walk. And then she wanted to go to Panera. It had to be Panera for lunch after walking club. And so I contacted this woman who runs this program and said, hey, you know, would you send a message out to your folks? Well, she actually talked to the girl, and she's actually paying the girl. So now she has a job, and she contacts everybody like the night before and says, we're meeting tomorrow. They've actually started doing this again with COVID, and they eat outside. And she contacts everyone and says, hey, just wanted to remind all of you that we're meeting. And then she actually takes attendance, and she contacts people if they don't show up to make sure they're okay and not sick. But she actually has a job from doing it. So there's a lot of great things happening, I think, in our communities, but just get connected and start asking questions. Look in your local rec departments. Usually it's under adaptive recreation, and oftentimes there's adult programs now for adaptive rec. If you start to look in yours and you don't see it, start talking to them about it and say, hey, could you guys maybe start offering some adult classes? That way, by the time your child gets there, it'll be a pretty robust program, I would think. And again, the vocational rehab, I talked about that a little bit ago. And those are the programs that help with employment. Don't let them scare you away if you decide, okay, I don't think my child's maybe capable of paid employment. It's a big push. Most states are really, there's this whole national push for a program called Employment First. And really the belief that everybody is capable of having that meaningful day and potential employment, even if they're training for it for years. And that's what that program helps with. So along with it can come a lot of other services. So definitely look into it. Let's see. And those are just some resources that you guys can go to learn more about each area. So thank you guys very much.